Friday, July 10, 2026. Washington is already moving into the weekend when a government website changes. There is no emergency broadcast, no president at a podium, no general standing beside an impossible machine. Just a fourth tab appearing on an official archive called Pursue, the Presidential Unsealing and Reporting System for UAP Encounters. 40 new files are added to a collection that has been growing since May. There are military videos, intelligence reports, space shuttle images. A 1949 conference at Los Alamos, a project sign progress report from 1948, and records connected to places where the word unknown carries a very different weight. One of them is Pantex, the facility in Texas where the United States assembles and dismantles nuclear weapons. In 2015, guards there reported lights moving near restricted airspace. The site entered a security posture. Nothing in the released file proves extraterrestrial activity, but the location transforms an unusual light into a national security event. Another record comes from the Yellow Sea in 2025, another from the East China Sea. Some images appear dramatic until range, sensor geometry, and processing become part of the question. One older case is explicitly complicated by altered media. This is not the evidence dump that generations of believers imagined, but it is also not nothing.
And that difference matters, because the official page does not say these files reveal alien craft. It says they are unresolved. That means the government cannot make a definitive determination from the available information. Unresolved is a limit on knowledge. It is not a classification of origin. Yet the presentation invites a much larger question. Why build a presidentially branded system? Why release material in timed tranches? Why mix obscure historical documents with recent sensor footage? Why create a new governance board and a council of scientists at the same moment? Is this simply how declassification looks when someone finally forces the bureaucracy to move? Or are we watching disclosure become a production?
For 79 years, the United States has moved between three positions on UFOs: investigate them, minimize them, and promise that the truth is coming. In 2026, those positions have been assembled into one machine. It has a directive, a portal, a release schedule, official cases, scientific advisors, and a public waiting for the next drop. This film will test the theory that the process is being staged, not the internet version where every shadow proves a secret invasion, a harder version. We will ask whether the government is releasing the best evidence or merely the safest evidence, whether transparency means access to raw data or access to a carefully selected story, whether the sudden legitimacy of the subject reflects new knowledge, political opportunity, or both. And we will test the strongest counterargument. That slow, incomplete, frustrating disclosure is exactly what we should expect from a fragmented security system filled with old paper, protected sensors, and ordinary human error. At the end, we will give the 2026 campaign a verdict. Genuine opening, political theater, controlled disclosure, or something that does not fit neatly into any of those boxes. The first clue is not hidden in a hangar, it is written in the original promise. On February 19, 2026, President Donald Trump published a directive aimed at the Secretary of War and other relevant departments and agencies. The language was unusually broad. Identify and release government files connected to alien and extraterrestrial life, unidentified anomalous phenomena, unidentified flying objects, and related information. It was not a carefully drafted executive order defining categories, deadlines, and exemptions. It was a public instruction built for immediate attention. 5 days later, Secretary Pete Hegseth said Pentagon personnel were working on it. He warned that the process would take time. Then, on May 8, the first files appeared. The name Pursue was almost too perfect: Presidential Unsealing and Reporting System for UAP Encounters. The website described an effort coordinated by the Department of War with support from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. According to the portal, Dozens of agencies would need to search tens of millions of records, some existing only on paper. The material would be reviewed, identified, declassified, and released on a rolling basis.
That description gives us the first important distinction. Declassification and disclosure are not the same thing. Declassification asks whether a document can lose its security restrictions. Disclosure asks whether the public is being given the information needed to understand what happened. A video can be declassified while its range data remains protected. An image can be public while the original metadata is absent. A witness narrative can be released without the sensor logs that might confirm or contradict it. Every one of those actions increases transparency. None necessarily resolves the case.
The government also defined the contents in a very specific way. These were unresolved records, cases in which it could not make a definitive determination, sometimes because there was not enough data. That is both an honest caveat and an extraordinarily effective frame. If a case is solved as a balloon, aircraft, or satellite, it belongs elsewhere. If it remains unexplained, it enters a public archive where mystery is the organizing principle. The system, therefore, does not represent a random sample of everything the government sees. It is a selection of material that survived the first rounds of explanation. That makes it interesting. It also makes it easy to misunderstand.
Imagine a hospital publishing only the medical cases that have not yet been diagnosed. The archive would be real. The uncertainty would be real. But using that archive to estimate how often medicine fails would produce a distorted picture. Pursue has the same selection problem. Its unresolved cases deserve investigation. But the archive cannot, by itself, tell us the percentage of all reports that become ordinary after analysis. It cannot tell us whether the missing data are mundane or explosive. And it cannot prove that what remains belongs to one phenomenon.
Still, the promise changed the politics of the subject. For decades, people demanded that the government open its files. In 2026, the government began doing exactly that publicly under a presidential brand. The question was no longer whether a release would happen. The question became what kind of truth a release schedule can produce. The first release arrived on May 8. The portal listed roughly 1.2 gigabytes of documents and 1.3 gigabytes of video. Its contents stretched across decades. Historical military records sat beside astronaut material and modern observations. The effect was not a single revelation. It was a compressed history of institutional uncertainty. 2 weeks later, on May 22, Release 2 arrived. The document package was much smaller, but the video archive was far larger, approximately 5.6 gigabytes. On June 12, Release 3 added another major collection. It included the case that quickly became known as the Mother Orb, an orange light described as producing smaller red lights over the western United States. Then came Release 4 on July 10, with more modern sensor imagery, older intelligence records, and the Pantex case.
The cadence matters because repetition creates expectation. Every few weeks, the public receives a new set of files. News organizations summarize the strangest cases. Creators isolate the most dramatic frames. Online communities compare the new drop with older testimony. Then attention begins to fall, just as the next release approaches. That does not prove manipulation. Publishing in batches is a practical way to process a huge archive, but it does create a serial narrative, and serial narratives have their own power.
The files also tell 4 different kinds of story. Some are historical. They show that the government took reports seriously much earlier than many official summaries suggested. Some are operational. A pilot, guard, or sensor operator sees something that cannot be identified in the moment. Some are analytical. Investigators compare possible explanations and explain what the evidence cannot establish. And some are simply fragments, a short clip, a still image, a transcript without the larger system that produced it. Those categories should never be treated as equivalent. A 1948 memo proves that an office discussed flying objects in 1948. It does not prove the objects were spacecraft. A modern infrared video proves that a sensor recorded a contrast pattern. It does not, without geometry and calibration, prove speed, size, or distance. A sincere witness statement proves that a person reported an experience. It does not automatically establish the cause.
This is where the public debate often breaks. Believers are accused of treating every unknown as alien. Skeptics are accused of treating every unknown as already solved. Both shortcuts erase the actual evidence. The better question is narrower. What does each file allow us to say? For some records, the answer is surprisingly little. For others, the answer is enough to justify continued investigation. And in a few cases, the most important fact is not the object at all. It is the way information was processed, altered, or withheld.
If a government wanted to acclimatize the public to an extraordinary reality, a sequence like this could make sense. Begin with ambiguity, normalize official discussion, increase the quality slowly, build institutions around the subject, avoid a single moment of shock. But the same sequence also makes sense if no extraordinary reality exists. Old archives are messy, agencies release what they can clear, modern cases often lack decisive data, public pressure rewards visible progress. A rolling portal solves a political problem while the underlying scientific problem remains. To decide between those explanations, we need to know whether this pattern is new. It is not. The modern UFO era is usually dated to June 1947, when pilot Kenneth Arnold reported objects moving near Mount Rainier. Newspapers turned his description into the phrase, flying saucers. Within weeks, reports spread across the United States. The military did not begin with one settled explanation. It began with a threat question. Could the objects be Soviet technology, misidentified aircraft, atmospheric effects, psychological warfare, hoaxes, something genuinely unknown? Project Sign was created in 1948 to examine reports. It was followed by Project Grudge, then Project Blue Book. The names changed. The core tension did not. Investigators needed enough openness to collect reports, but enough secrecy to protect what the military itself was testing. They needed to reassure the public without pretending every case had a clean answer. And they needed to prevent an adversary from using waves of reports to overwhelm warning systems.
One disputed episode captures that tension. Edward Ruppelt, the first director of Project Blue Book, later wrote that Project Sign personnel prepared an estimate of the situation, arguing that some objects might be interplanetary. According to his account, senior leadership rejected it because the evidence was insufficient. The document itself did not survive in a publicly verifiable form. That story is often presented as the first suppressed disclosure. But even if Ruppelt's account is accurate, it shows an internal hypothesis being rejected. It does not show that the hypothesis was proven. This distinction appears again and again. An extraordinary possibility discussed inside government becomes, in later retellings, an extraordinary conclusion hidden by government.
In 1952, a wave of sightings over Washington intensified public pressure. The CIA convened a scientific panel led by physicist Howard Robertson. The panel did not conclude that extraterrestrial craft were visiting Earth. It worried that the volume of reports could clog communication channels, encourage panic, or provide cover for hostile activity. Its recommendations included better training, rapid explanation of ordinary cases, and reducing the public's uncritical response to sensational reports. To many researchers, that looks like a blueprint for managing perception. And in one sense, it was. The government was not only studying objects, it was studying how society reacted to stories about objects.
But managing public reaction is not identical to hiding alien contact. During the Cold War, warning systems had limited capacity. A flood of false reports could have operational consequences. The Soviet threat was not theoretical. Neither was the risk of revealing American sensors and aircraft. The troubling part is not that officials considered public communication. Governments do that in every security crisis. The troubling part is what happens when communication is designed mainly to reduce attention. Legitimate unknowns can be swept into the same language as obvious mistakes. Witnesses learn that reporting is professionally dangerous, and every later correction appears to confirm the original suspicion.
Project Blue Book eventually catalogued more than 12,000 reports before closing in 1969. Most received ordinary explanations. A smaller number remained unidentified, often because the information was incomplete. The Air Force concluded that the reports did not demonstrate a threat, advanced technology beyond known science, or extraterrestrial vehicles. Yet the process left a cultural wound. Consultant J. Allen Hynek said he had often been expected to debunk. Ruppelt wrote that the Air Force wanted explanations aligned with its public position. Swamp gas became shorthand for institutional dismissal, even when later cases had nothing to do with the original remark. The result was a paradox. The more the government tried to close the subject, the more durable the cover-up narrative became.
That paradox is central to 2026. If officials now release unresolved cases, critics ask why they withheld them. If officials explain cases, critics see debunking. If they protect censor details, the missing information becomes evidence of secrecy. If they disclose censor details, they may reveal capabilities. There is no communication strategy that automatically creates trust after decades of contradiction. But there is one historical fact that makes distrust rational, even without aliens. For years, the government knew the real explanation for many extraordinary sightings and could not tell the public.
In the 1950s, commercial aircraft usually flew far below the operating altitude of a new American reconnaissance aircraft, the U-2. At around 60,000 feet, the U-2 could remain illuminated by sunlight after the sky below had darkened. To a pilot or observer at lower altitude, it could appear as a brilliant object moving where no ordinary aircraft was expected to be. Reports followed. Blue Book investigators sometimes asked the CIA to compare UFO reports with secret flight logs. When the times and locations matched, investigators had an explanation they could not publicly reveal. A declassified CIA history later estimated that U-2 and then OXCART flights accounted for more than half of investigated UFO reports during parts of the late 1950s and 1960s.
Consider what that meant for a witness. You see a real object. It behaves unlike the aircraft you know. You report it honestly. The government investigates. Then you receive an explanation that feels weak or no explanation at all. Decades later, the government admits that a secret machine was in the sky. Your observation was genuine. Your alien interpretation may have been wrong. Your suspicion that officials knew more than they said was correct. That combination is almost perfectly designed to create a lasting disclosure mythology.
The A-12 OXCART made the problem even more extreme. Developed in secrecy and tested at Groom Lake, the site later known globally as Area 51, it could fly above 90,000 feet at more than 3 times the speed of sound. Before disclosure, descriptions of such performance would have sounded exaggerated. After disclosure, they became aviation history. This is one reason the phrase, impossible technology, must be handled carefully. Sometimes it means physics has been violated. Sometimes it means the observer lacks distance. Sometimes it means a classified system is 20 years ahead of public awareness. And sometimes it means the data are simply too poor to know what moved.
None of this resolves every case. It does establish a mechanism. National security secrecy can produce sincere UFO reports. Compartmentalization can prevent one government office from knowing what another is operating. Public explanations can be false or incomplete without concealing extraterrestrial life. And when the truth arrives decades later, it teaches the public that today's denial may become tomorrow's museum exhibit.
This is the strongest historical argument for taking disclosure claims seriously. It is also the strongest historical argument against assuming the hidden answer is alien. The government has concealed extraordinary technology before. It was extraordinary human technology. For nearly 5 decades after Blue Book closed, the official public message was simple. There was no active Air Force program worth watching. Then the subject returned through a different door. In December 2017, reporting revealed that the Pentagon had funded a program associated with unusual aerospace investigations. At the same time, videos recorded by U.S. Navy systems reached a mass audience. The footage was not a confession. It was more consequential than that. It showed military personnel encountering objects they could not immediately identify, using instruments the public recognized as serious. Pilots began speaking openly. The old image of a lone civilian witness in a field was replaced by carrier groups, radar operators, and trained aviators.
In April 2020, the Department of Defense officially authorized the release of 3 Navy videos recorded in 2004 and 2015. The department said the videos were authentic Navy material and that the phenomena remained characterized as unidentified. That statement is narrower than the headlines it produced. The videos are real. The encounters were investigated. The official status was unidentified. None of those facts determines the object's origin.
In August 2020, the Pentagon established the Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force. The stated mission was to detect, analyze, and catalog reports that might threaten flight safety or national security. Then Congress required a public assessment. The Office of the Director of National Intelligence released it in June 2021. The report reviewed 144 incidents, mainly from 2004 through early 2021. It said most probably involved physical objects because many were detected across more than one sensor. It also said that limited high-quality reporting prevented firm conclusions. Some incidents appeared to show unusual flight characteristics, but the assessment explicitly listed sensor errors, spoofing, and observer misperception among the possibilities requiring further analysis. Only one case was identified with high confidence in that report: a large deflating balloon.
The most important line was not about propulsion. It was about categories. The intelligence community said there were probably multiple kinds of UAP requiring different explanations. That sentence cuts against the idea that every military unknown belongs to one hidden presence. A balloon, a drone, a sensor artifact, a foreign collection platform, a classified American system, and a genuinely unexplained object can all enter the same database at the beginning. UAP describes the state of identification. It does not describe a species of craft.
By August 2022, the official total had grown to 510 reports. Authorities attributed part of the increase to improved reporting and reduced stigma. Congress then expanded the mission of the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, AARO. NASA created an independent study team focused on data quality and scientific methods. The language of the subject changed. Flying saucers became unidentified aerial phenomena, then unidentified anomalous phenomena. Stories became cases. Witnesses became data sources. Debunking became resolution. Belief became domain awareness. This professionalization was real, but it created a new problem.
Official attention can be mistaken for official confirmation. An office may be created because reports affect flight safety, because Congress demands oversight, because foreign drones are a concern, or because public trust has collapsed. The existence of the office does not reveal what the office will find, and as the system became more formal, the claims entering it became more extraordinary. In 2023, they reached Congress.
On July 26, 2023, 3 witnesses sat before a House subcommittee: former Navy Commander David Fravor, former Navy pilot Ryan Grave, and former intelligence officer David Grush. Fravor described the 2004 encounter commonly associated with the tic-tac. Grave described recurring aviation safety concerns and the professional stigma surrounding reports. Grush went further. He testified that he had been informed of a multi-decade crash retrieval and reverse engineering program operating outside proper congressional oversight. He said non-human biologics had been recovered in connection with some material. He also described retaliation connected to his efforts.
The setting matters. This was sworn congressional testimony from a former intelligence officer, not an anonymous post. The evidentiary limit matters just as much. In the public hearing, Grush did not present a craft, biological sample, or document independently establishing the alleged program. Much of his knowledge, by his own description, came from interviews with people he considered credible, and from information he could discuss only in a classified setting. The correct sentence is not "Congress proved crash retrievals." It is Grush testified that a crash retrieval program existed.
That testimony created a direct conflict with the office Congress had established to find the truth. In March 2024, AARO published the first volume of its historical record report. Its conclusion was blunt. The office said it had found no empirical evidence that the United States government or private companies were reverse engineering extraterrestrial technology. It said no official investigation had confirmed that a UAP represented off-world technology. AARO argued that many modern allegations could be traced through a relatively small network of people connected to earlier programs and private paranormal research. It also described cases in which authentic classified programs were interpreted as alien programs by people who did not have complete access.
One example was KONA Blue. The name sounds exactly like the secret program a whistleblower might expose. In AARO's account, however, KONA Blue was a proposed Department of Homeland Security program supported by people who already believed the government possessed off-world technology. The proposal anticipated that such material might be transferred into the program, but AARO said the program was never approved, never established as a special access program, and never received extraterrestrial craft or bodies. That creates a dangerous loop. People believe a hidden program exists. They propose a classified program to recover what they believe is hidden. The proposal generates authentic government paperwork. Years later, the paperwork is treated as evidence that the original hidden program existed.
AARO's report is the strongest official case against the crash retrieval narrative. It is not automatically the final word. Critics question whether AARO had access to every deeply compartmented program, whether witnesses trusted the office, and whether an organization inside the Pentagon can independently investigate Pentagon secrecy. Those are legitimate oversight questions. But they do not erase the report's findings. A claim that AARO lacked access must itself be supported. Otherwise, every negative result becomes unfalsifiable. If investigators find nothing, the absence is treated as proof that the secret is deeper.
This is the point where the debate often becomes two closed systems. In the first, testimony from credentialed witnesses accumulates until the number of claims feels like proof. Contradictions become evidence of a cover-up. In the second, the absence of publicly verified material ends the discussion. Unresolved cases become noise, and institutional failures become irrelevant. A serious investigation must remain open to two possibilities at once. First, sincere, connected officials may have encountered a real program hidden behind extraordinary secrecy. Second, sincere, connected officials may be repeating interpretations that circulated inside a small network and attach themselves to authentic but misunderstood programs.
Public evidence has not resolved that conflict. Then, in 2026, the government did something unexpected. It did not choose between the whistleblowers and AARO. It built a larger disclosure system around both. By June 2026, disclosure was no longer a single office or website. An official from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence confirmed the creation of an interagency UAP governance board involving ODNI, the FBI, and the Department of War. The board met for the first time in June. Its role included coordinating declassification and supporting AARO's work across agencies. Beneath that board, a new UAP Science Advisory Council was formed. Harvard astrophysicist Avi Loeb became its chair. The roster brought together scientists, former military personnel, technology figures, and skeptics. According to the public description, information shared with the council would be unclassified.
That last condition is essential. A science council can improve methods, identify mundane explanations, request better data, and create public legitimacy. But a council restricted to unclassified material cannot independently rule on evidence it is not allowed to see. This does not make the council fake. It defines the boundary of its authority. And the boundary creates another version of the old problem. Experts may be asked to evaluate a mystery while the systems that recorded it remain partly protected.
After its first meeting, the council requested more than 50 additional videos, images, and documents, according to reporting by the Associated Press. That request can be read in two opposite ways. The optimistic reading is that serious outside experts are beginning to push beyond curated releases. The skeptical reading is that the government has created a prestigious advisory layer that can validate the process without receiving the most sensitive evidence. Both readings are possible because the council is new. Its credibility will depend less on the names attached to it than on what data it receives, what methods it publishes, and whether its disagreements become public.
Loeb's appointment adds another tension. He is a respected astrophysicist willing to investigate hypotheses that many colleagues consider premature. He argued that the interstellar object Oumuamua might have been artificial and pursued material from the Pacific in search of unusual origins. Critics, including former AARO director Sean Kirkpatrick, have challenged the strength of those interpretations. For supporters, Loeb is exactly the kind of scientist disclosure requires: accomplished, curious, and resistant to stigma. For critics, he risks giving speculative ideas institutional weight before the evidence is strong enough.
Again, the structure works whichever story you prefer. If the government possesses extraordinary evidence, a council could help prepare scientific institutions to evaluate it. If the government possesses mostly ambiguous cases, a council could help resolve them and reassure the public that independent minds were invited inside. If the administration wants the appearance of openness, a council could provide credibility at relatively low political cost. We cannot infer the answer from the council's existence. We can infer that the politics of UAP have changed. In 1969, the government tried to close the file. In 2026, it is building a permanent audience for the file. To judge the process, we need to stop talking about the files as one object. We will examine 5, not because they prove the same thing, but because they reveal 5 different limits of disclosure. The first is the Western United States event, now known as the Mother Orb. An official unresolved case update, dated June 5, 2026, describes observations by federal law enforcement personnel. A large orange luminous object was reported in the distance. Smaller red lights appeared to move away from it. 5 witnesses were referenced in the released material. The language is striking because the event sounds structured. A source object, smaller objects, multiple trained observers.
But the report does not give us a recovered object or an instrument package capable of establishing origin. The apparent relationship between the lights depends on perspective. Without reliable distance, separate objects at different ranges can appear connected. Without spectral data, a luminous orange object remains a visual description. Without continuous calibrated tracking, motion is difficult to reconstruct. The correct conclusion is not that nothing happened. Something was reported by multiple federal witnesses, and investigators did not resolve it from the available evidence. That is significant. It is not yet a vehicle classification.
The second case is Pantex. Pantex is not a random patch of sky. It is a critical nuclear weapons facility northeast of Amarillo, Texas. In 2015, Reports of unexplained lights near the site produced an operational response. The public record establishes concern, location, and witness reporting. It does not establish that the lights penetrated the facility, interfered with weapons, or displayed technology beyond human capability. This distinction matters because nuclear locations carry decades of UAP mythology. Once the word nuclear appears, later retellings often absorb stronger claims from unrelated incidents.
The national security explanation may be enough to justify secrecy. Even an ordinary drone near a nuclear facility can expose guard procedures, sensor coverage, and response times. Releasing a complete technical package might reveal more about Pantex than about the object. This is where calls for total transparency collide with real security concerns. But the collision should not become an excuse for useless disclosure. The government could still provide time, duration, general viewing geometry, weather, known aircraft checks, and a clear list of data withheld. Without that structure, the public receives atmosphere instead of analysis.
The third and fourth cases come from the Western Pacific. An image from the Yellow Sea in 2025 shows a high-contrast shape with a star-like appearance. A separate East China Sea case presents another small infrared target. These images are visually powerful because military displays imply precision, but a sensor optimized to detect targets is not automatically a camera that preserves the object's shape. Blooming, glare, focus, compression, tracking modes, and the sensor's point spread function can transform a small source into a dramatic geometry.
This is not a generic debunk. It is a measurement problem. To infer a craft from an infrared image, we need to know whether the visible outline belongs to the object or to the imaging system. To infer speed, we need range and platform motion. To infer size, we need angular scale and distance. To infer unusual acceleration, we need stable tracking and timing. When those variables are missing, the image may remain genuinely unresolved. It may also be impossible to use as evidence for the extraordinary claim viewers naturally see in it.
The fifth case is more uncomfortable because it concerns the evidence itself. A 1996 Western U.S. record in Release 4 involves media that investigators say had been altered. Alteration does not always mean a malicious hoax. Files are cropped, transcoded, enhanced, re-recorded, and stripped of metadata every day. But once the chain of custody is broken, analysis changes. You are no longer asking only, what is the object? You are asking, what happened to the file between the sensor and us?
That question has become more important in the age of generative AI. An authentic-looking clip can now be created. A real clip can be modified in subtle ways. A low-quality original can pass through years of social media compression until no analyst can recover what the first observer saw. The 2026 archive, therefore, contains two mysteries: unidentified phenomena and uncertain information pipelines. Only one of them requires anything non-human.
Now place these cases beside the historical records. Los Alamos, 1949. Project Sign, 1948. Intelligence summaries, space shuttle imagery from the 1990s, modern pilot reports, nuclear site observations, infrared targets. The archive creates continuity across 8 decades. But continuity of paperwork is not continuity of cause. A report from 1948 and a sensor clip from 2025 may share the label UAP while having nothing else in common. This is the archive's greatest strength and its greatest illusion. It proves the persistence of the unknown. It does not prove the persistence of one hidden intelligence.
And that leads to the question the portal cannot answer. Why these files? Why release a dramatic unresolved case but not the complete technical package around it? Why combine cases separated by continents, sensors, and generations? Why place high-interest material inside a presidential transparency campaign rather than an ordinary scientific database? Selection is unavoidable, but selection is also where a narrative is built.
There are 4 plausible reasons for the timing of the 2026 campaign. The first is political. UFO disclosure is unusually flexible. It attracts voters across ideological lines. It allows an administration to present itself against entrenched bureaucracy. It converts secrecy into a conflict between a decisive president and unaccountable agencies. The promise is emotionally powerful and initially inexpensive. Ordering a search creates attention immediately. The difficult questions arrive later when agencies decide what can be released.
This does not mean the files are fake. Real material can be released for political reasons. A genuine transparency effort can also be marketed. Motive does not determine the truth of the underlying cases, but motive helps explain presentation. Pursue is not named like a neutral records repository. It foregrounds the president. Official statements describe a historic undertaking. The archive is framed as a break with hidden classifications and past secrecy. That is political storytelling, even if every file is authentic.
The second reason is institutional pressure. Congress has held hearings. Pilots and former officials have spoken publicly. Reporting channels have expanded. AARO has accumulated cases. Agencies face recurring requests for records that once could be handled separately. A central portal gives the government a place to direct that pressure. It creates a visible measure of progress. It also lets the executive branch control format, timing, and context. The third reason is scientific legitimacy. NASA's 2023 independent study did not find evidence of extraterrestrial origin. It argued that better, calibrated data and reduced stigma were necessary. The New Science Council continues that movement from belief toward method. Institutional science is not confirming the extraordinary claim. It is confirming that the question can be studied without ridicule.
The fourth reason is cultural timing. In June 2026, Steven Spielberg's film Disclosure Day arrived in cinemas as government files and a New Science Council were becoming news. The overlap is irresistible. A filmmaker associated with some of the most influential alien contact stories in modern culture releases a major film while Washington releases UFO records. Online, timing quickly becomes evidence, but no public record establishes coordination between the film and the government campaign. Studios choose release dates years in advance. Governments move slowly. A shared cultural moment can produce convergence without conspiracy.
Still, culture affects interpretation. When audiences have spent decades learning the visual language of disclosure, real government footage enters a story already written for it. A distant light becomes a visitor. A classified folder becomes a cover-up. A council becomes preparation. A release date becomes a countdown. The government does not need to invent that narrative. It only needs to place material into it.
And the reverse is also true. Officials may underestimate how strongly their branding and cadence encourage an extraordinary reading. They can write unresolved in plain language and still surround the word with presidential authority, hidden files, and decades of mythology. If the goal is scientific clarity, presentation matters. If the goal is attention, the ambiguity works beautifully.
Now we can build the strongest case for controlled disclosure. Argument 1. The process is deliberately gradual. The directive is followed by timed tranches, not one archive dump. Each release renews attention while preserving the expectation of more. That is exactly how an institution would reduce shock and measure public response. Argument 2. The material is selected for ambiguity. Resolved cases are separated from the archive. The public is shown records that retain mystery, often without enough raw context to settle them. This sustains discussion without forcing a final claim. Argument 3. Institutions are being built before conclusions are announced. A governance board coordinates agencies. AARO remains the official analytical body. A science council adds outside credibility. The architecture could prepare government and science for information that no single office could release alone.
Argument 4. The language normalizes the extraordinary subject. A president openly refers to alien and extraterrestrial life. A cabinet secretary promises unprecedented transparency. Military cases and historical records appear on a government portal. Scientists discuss UAP without treating the topic as career-ending. Even if no extraterrestrial evidence is released, the social category changes. The question is no longer whether respectable institutions may discuss UAP. They already do.
Argument 5. The government has a documented history of partial truth. Secret aircraft produced real sightings while public investigators could not reveal the cause. Blue Book and the Robertson panel considered how attention should be managed. Compartmentalization allowed different parts of government to hold different pieces of reality. If extraordinary evidence existed today, history suggests that disclosure would be managed around security, capability, and institutional risk. It would probably not begin with a complete confession.
Taken together, these arguments establish something important. The 2026 campaign is controlled. Files are reviewed before release. Cases are selected. The schedule is managed. Language is coordinated. Access is tiered. Institutions define what enters the public record. But this is controlled disclosure in the ordinary sense of government communication. The extraordinary theory adds another claim, that the thing being controlled is confirmed knowledge of non-human intelligence. The pattern is consistent with that theory. It is not unique to that theory.
This is the central analytical trap. A pattern can fit an explanation without proving it. Gradual releases fit acclimatization. They also fit declassification workflow. Ambiguous material fits a plan to prepare the public. It also fits a database defined by unresolved cases. New scientific institutions fit preparation for contact. They also fit Congress demanding more rigorous analysis. Political branding fits a coordinated disclosure campaign. It also fits normal presidential communication. To move from consistency to evidence, we would need a feature that the ordinary explanation does not predict. So far, the public archive has not provided one.
The strongest case against an extraordinary disclosure plan begins with bureaucracy. The United States government is not one mind. Records are distributed across military services, intelligence agencies, laboratories, law enforcement offices, contractors, and archives. Classification decisions may depend on the sensor, the platform, the location, foreign partnerships, and personal information inside the same file. A rolling release is not suspicious by itself. It may be the only practical way to publish anything before the review is complete.
The second counterargument is data quality. NASA, ODNI, and AARO have all described the same recurring problem. Many reports lack timely, calibrated, actionable information. In the 2024 annual report, AARO said it received 757 reports during the covered period. Hundreds were resolved or queued for resolution as balloons, birds, drones, satellites, and aircraft. 21 merited further analysis. Hundreds more lacked enough data for meaningful analysis. That distribution is not what a catalog of advanced craft would necessarily look like. It is what a reporting system looks like when ordinary objects, sensor limits, and a small residue of difficult cases all enter together.
The third counterargument is adversary activity. Foreign surveillance platforms and drones are real. Flight safety hazards are real. Electronic warfare and spoofing are real. A military organization has good reason to investigate unknown objects without believing they come from another world. Publishing some cases can encourage reporting while preserving the technical details needed to detect adversaries. The resulting secrecy may be frustrating, but it has an ordinary national security logic.
The fourth counterargument is institutional self-correction. The government that once minimized reports now has standardized channels, an analytical office, public hearings, NASA involvement, historical reviews, and a searchable archive. That can be interpreted as preparation for a revelation. It can also be interpreted as a democratic system responding slowly and imperfectly to oversight and public pressure. Not every change in position reveals hidden knowledge. Sometimes institutions change because the cost of ignoring a subject becomes greater than the cost of studying it.
The fifth counterargument is the absence of decisive public evidence. After decades of claims, no publicly verified material has demonstrated an extraterrestrial vehicle, biological sample, or communication. AARO says it found no empirical evidence of reverse engineering. NASA says the current data do not support definitive scientific conclusions. The 2026 releases add unresolved records, not a confirmed origin. Absence of public evidence is not proof that no secret exists, but it limits what a responsible documentary can conclude. The greater the claim, the more damaging it becomes to treat promised evidence as delivered evidence.
There is also a simpler political explanation. An administration can benefit from disclosure theater even if agencies possess nothing extraordinary. The public receives visible action. The president appears to confront secrecy. News cycles are filled with compelling material. If no final answer arrives, the incompleteness can be blamed on decades of bureaucracy. This explanation requires no hidden spacecraft. It requires only real archives, real uncertainty, and strong incentives.
That may sound cynical. It is still different from saying the entire subject is fake. Some cases are unresolved. Some witnesses are credible. Some historical explanations were incomplete. Some data deserve better analysis. The case against conspiracy is not that there is nothing to investigate. It is that investigation and confirmation are different stages, and the public is repeatedly encouraged to experience the first as if it were the second.
If the word disclosure is going to mean more than publication, it needs a standard. Here is ours. First, provenance. Who recorded the material? On what platform? When and where? What is the chain from the original censor to the public file? Second, the least processed data that can be released. Not only a cropped clip, not only an enhanced still, the original or a technically documented derivative with every removed element explained. Third, geometry. Platform position, viewing angle, line of sight, estimated range, and camera motion. Without geometry, apparent speed and size are often stories told by the frame.
Fourth, sensor characteristics. Field of view, frame rate, tracking mode, zoom, known artifacts, and calibration. A military sensor can be highly capable and still produce an image that viewers misread. Fifth, competing explanations. What aircraft, balloons, satellites, drones, weather, and astronomical objects were checked? Which possibilities were rejected and why? Sixth, independent access. Qualified analysts outside the originating chain of command must be able to inspect enough data to reproduce the reasoning. Prestige is not independence. A council that receives only selected unclassified material should say exactly what it could not review. Seventh, publication of resolutions. The government should release solved cases with the same clarity and visibility as unresolved ones. Otherwise, the public archive will systematically exaggerate mystery.
Apply that standard to pursue, and the result is mixed. The portal is a genuine improvement. It centralizes records that would otherwise remain scattered. It confirms that agencies documented incidents across many decades. It allows researchers to compare reports and challenge official analysis, but many releases do not contain enough technical context to reproduce a conclusion. Some are historical fragments, some are witness narratives, some are visually dramatic but analytically thin. This is disclosure of records. It is not yet disclosure of a resolved reality.
The standard also protects the extraordinary possibility. If a future case survives verified provenance, calibrated multi-sensor data, known platform checks, independent analysis, and a secure chain of custody, it should not be explained away simply because the conclusion is uncomfortable. Skepticism is not the refusal to accept surprising evidence. It is the refusal to lower the standard before the evidence arrives.
So is UFO disclosure being staged? Yes, in one clear sense. The 2026 campaign is a constructed public event. It has presidential branding, timed releases, selected unresolved material, coordinated statements, and new advisory institutions. The government is not opening a warehouse door and walking away. It is choosing how the story enters public life. That is controlled disclosure. It is also normal for sensitive records.
Is it political theater? Partly. The administration receives the benefits of transparency before the archive produces a definitive answer. The word alien creates attention. The release cadence sustains it. The unresolved frame guarantees that mystery survives. But theater does not make the documents false. Presentation and authenticity are separate questions.
Is it evidence of a secret acclimatization program preparing humanity for confirmed non-human intelligence? Not on the public record, available in July 2026. The pattern fits that idea, but it also fits ordinary declassification, institutional pressure, scientific reform, and political incentive. The released cases contain unknowns. They do not yet contain the evidence that makes the extraordinary explanation necessary.
The most important discovery may be less cinematic. For decades, secrecy created a feedback loop. Real classified technology produced strange observations. Incomplete explanations damaged trust. Damaged trust made every missing detail suspicious. Suspicion encouraged larger claims. Larger claims pushed government toward new investigations. Those investigations generated more classified records, more public pressure, and more uncertainty. Pursue is the latest attempt to interrupt that loop. It may also be feeding it.
The next decisive step will not be another dramatic frame. It will be a release that lets independent analysts reconstruct what the censor saw, a case with provenance, geometry, calibration, and chain of custody. A conclusion that remains extraordinary after ordinary explanations have been tested in public. Until then, the honest position is uncomfortable. Governments have hidden advanced programs. Witnesses have reported events that remain unresolved. Officials have made extraordinary allegations under oath. The official investigative office says it has found no empirical evidence of extraterrestrial technology. All four statements can be true at the same time.
And that is why the question survives. Not because every light is a visitor. Not because every denial is a lie. Because the institutions asking for trust are the same institutions that must protect secrets, and the public can no longer tell where protection ends and concealment begins.
The disclosure process has started. The disclosure standard has not yet been met. For now, the most revealing part of the 2026 pattern is not what the government has shown. It is how carefully it has chosen the way we see it.